The old man motioned me in with his right hand, and with a courtly gesture saying in excellent English, "Welcome to my house. Enter freely and of your own free will." Thus reads the journal entry of Jonathan Harker, as he describes his first encounter with Count Dracula at his deserted castle high in the Carpathian Mountains. Taken from a novel of the same name, Dracula has gone on to inspire over 1,000 films, as well as spawning countless more books and TV shows, introducing us to an image of the modern vampire, an image that has become synonymous with our fascination and fear of the undead. But ironically for a novel that is only matched in sales figures by the Bible, little or nothing is known about its author. Bram Stoker, the man who gave birth to the most recognisable image in contemporary horror, is himself a man of shadow. But who was Bram Stoker? And why is it, after creating such an iconic figure as the Count, that his life remains a mystery?
I see our friend is walking down the road now.
Abraham Stoker, more commonly known as Bram, was born on the 8th of November 1847 here in this house, number 15 The Crescent in Clontarf, a suburb of Dublin. The youngest of 5 children, Bram was a sickly child who could not walk unaided until the age of 7. The reason for his illness remains largely unknown, though it has been suggested that it may have been psychological, as nothing was found to indicate a lasting condition. In fact, by his early 20s, Bram had recovered enough to become an accomplished athlete and rugby player, as well as a respected member of Dublin society.
Well, there's a lot of speculation, obviously, as to how this illness affected Bram in later life, because as we know, he developed to be a very large man. He was 6'2", which was huge in that era. He became a very talented athlete. But we do know that the effect of being in bed for those years had a definite influence on him.
He was, in effect, an invalid for the first 7 years of his life. And while his brothers and his sisters could play outside the bedroom window in Fairview Park, Bram could only look from the confines of his bed and envy that his brothers and sisters were able to do things that he himself wasn't.
It certainly appeared to have been a dark type of existence. Apparently he was, fond of being in rooms where the light was cut out. And a person who was very, very influential in his life was his mother. And during those years, when incidentally he was given up for dead most times, and I say most times, very often, they said this Bram is not going to survive, and he was actually left for dead. But his mother didn't leave him for dead. She talked to him all the time.
And his mother was a real influence on Bram's interest in the macabre and supernatural, because she was given to telling him stories relating to her own childhood, and she had actually witnessed the results of the cholera epidemic in Sligo. And there were some very, very harrowing scenes there that she also described.
He developed an interest in things like secret codes, and he feels he became rather secretive, but it also developed his imagination. And it's very likely that it was this period of being confined to bed for those 7 years that developed his imagination, allowed it to run riot, and was an important factor in him becoming a writer in later life.
This mystery illness, as mysteriously as it had come, disappeared and never recurred. But there is no doubt that for the first 7 years of his life, he was denied the activities and the excitement that many children experience.
Bram wasn't strong enough to attend a regular national school. He had to be sent to a private school. He's 6'2". At about 14, he was sent to Trinity College. And Bram more or less instantly fell in love with Trinity. And it was there he was to, develop into the Bram Stoker, the writer, the author, the theatre lover, the everything that we in later life came to know Bram for.
During his time at Trinity, he involved himself in a considerable number of sporting activities for which he won trophies. He also, on the other side of the equation, so to speak, became active in the principal debating societies of the time, and indeed the principal debating societies even of this time, specifically the Philosophical Society and the Historical Society.
These were the two, and still are, the two great societies for undergraduates at Trinity. It's very, very unusual for one man to head both of them. Only very few people in history have done that, but Bram managed to do it.
And Bram was the student in the tailcoat and the top hat, if you like, and loved organising debates, loved the pomp and ceremony of the whole thing, which again was to be influential in his life when he became a theatre manager.
It does appear as if Bram Stoker's participation in Trinity College life, both academic and sporting, was as full as it could have been.
He was one of the founders of rugby in Ireland, and he played for Trinity at a time when Trinity was the outstanding team in Ireland. He was also the great hero of the annual sports days in Trinity. He was the champion of the walking races, which at that time were the biggest athletic item going. And 50,000 people would go to College Park to see these games. And he actually also performed as a trapeze artist, believe it or not. So he was clearly an outstanding athlete. Of course, he was a natural athlete, but perhaps the fact that he was confined to bed for 7 years made him determined to develop his athleticism as much as he could, once he had the opportunity to do so.
When Stoker left Trinity College armed with the degrees of Bachelor of Arts and Master of Arts, he took up a job as a civil servant. And in those days, in the early 1870s, the centre of the civil service administration was Dublin Castle.
Well, in the civil service, Bram was a regular clerk first, and a point that a lot of people forget, many scholars of Stoker and Dracula forget, he became a clerk of the petty sessions. The petty sessions were the court around the country Ireland.
But one can only gauge his attitude to his career in the civil service by the other things that he did at the same time, from which one I think must conclude that he regarded the civil service as a dull day job and nothing more than that. For example, from around the time that he began to work in the civil service, he also became involved in the theatrical life of Dublin, and he became an unpaid theatre critic for the Evening Mail, a Dublin newspaper of the time, which meant he frequently would have gone to theatrical performances and would have written them up in his spare time.
While working as a civil servant, Bram met a young girl by the name of Florence Balcom. He was quite taken by this 19-year-old and soon began courting her. Quite how they met is unclear. But what is known, however, is at the time of their meeting, Florence was involved in a then 2-year relationship with the infamous Irish writer Oscar Wilde.
Oscar, a young Oscar Wilde, was courting a lovely girl who also came from Clontarf called Florence Balcom, one of society's beauties.
And at the time that Bram Stoker met Florence Balcom, she then in her late teens, he then in his late 20s, early 30s, she had been keeping company with Oscar Wilde, who was considerably younger than Bram.
And Florence, if you like, I wouldn't like to let the lady's reputation down, but she was two-timing a little bit. She was sort of courting both of them.
I cannot say precisely the circumstances in which Florence Balcom took the decision to leave Oscar Wilde and attach herself to Bram Stoker, but there is little doubt that Bram decided that Florence was the girl he wanted.
She seems to have been the great love of Wilde's early life, and he was clearly devastated at losing her. Bram was very friendly with Oscar Wilde's family, so it's possible that they met through the Wildes. This, of course, would have increased Oscar's angst at losing her.
Getting a secure husband, secure work-wise that is, may have influenced her more than anything else, and no doubt her parents perhaps pushed her a little to choose the more mature Bram, who was a civil servant, steady job at the time, whereas Oscar would have been sort of the cigar-swinging, gin-drinking, well-spoken but no prospect type of a gentleman at the time. So I would have thought there wouldn't have been much deeper involved than that, and she married Bram.
Sorry, that's too bad.
It was while Bram Stoker was working in the civil service and as an unpaid theatre critic for the Evening Mail that he first came into contact with the then rising English actor Henry Irving.
As a young civil servant in Dublin, Bram was also very active as a journalist, and he edited some papers. He also became a leading theatre critic, and he revolutionised the way in which theatre criticism was performed in Dublin. And when Henry Irving came to Dublin to play in the Theatre Royal here, his plays were reviewed by Stoker, And Irving was very struck by Stoker's insightful criticism of his work and asked to meet him. If we look at how Stoker first met Henry Irving, we just reel back a few years, and the fact that as a young civil servant in Dublin, Bram was also very active as a journalist, and he edited some papers. He also became a leading theatre critic, and he revolutionised the way in which theatre criticism was performed in Dublin. And when Henry Irving came to Dublin to play in the Theatre Royal here, his plays were reviewed by Stoker,